Now, one of the important things about the Law Merit Badge and about law in general is the enforcement of that law. And we have with us today a very special guest who's going to talk to you about that. In your Merit Badge book, you have a section on law enforcement. And in that section, you have a series of questions that are also there for you to ask law enforcement. But first, we're going to ask Chief Rick Wells of the Palmetto Police Department to come forward and to give you an overview of what he does on a day-to-day and how important law enforcement is. Chief?
Thank you. Good morning. Thanks for having me here today. Just briefly, I'll tell you, I've been in law enforcement for almost 28 years. Started back in early 1984 and started with the Manatee County Sheriff's Office. My dad, Sheriff Charlie Wells, was elected in 1985, which caused me to leave, excuse me, due to nepotism law. So I moved over to the Highway Patrol for 21 years. Went back to the Sheriff's Office after he retired, and then was appointed Chief July of 2010 here at the Palmetto Police Department. And I am responsible for anything that goes on in the city of Palmetto. I have 34 sworn officers that I'm responsible for, and I also have 11 clerical staff inside the station that have many responsibilities that we have to take care of. Now, it's our job to protect and to serve the citizens of Manatee County, but we have to stay within the city of Palmetto. That's our jurisdiction. That's where we have to concentrate our efforts. Anything outside of the city limits of Palmetto, the Manatee County Sheriff's Office handles. So we have to stay inside that city. That's where our arrest powers are granted, and therefore everything that goes on, any crime that's occurred, we handle the investigation. Now, to even become a law enforcement officer requires a tremendous amount of training. It's close to 800 hours now. Locally, we go to the MTI, Manatee Technical Institute, the main campus out off of Lakewood Ranches where the Criminal Justice Academy is held. The applicant must be granted permission by a board to even attend the Law Enforcement Academy. There's a very strict screening process that goes on before you can even get into the academy. Why do you think that is? Why would it be so important for us to screen applicants who are going to pay money to attend an academy? Anybody have an answer for that? Yes, sir.
So you don't like becoming a police officer and you're not trustworthy and you harass people you want?
Absolutely. And that is the main reason, because we want to make sure that we're getting the best possible candidate with character. We want them to be ethical. The morals, very important. Everything that you're about now, everything that you try so hard to be is exactly what we want. We want people that are going to come into law enforcement and protect and serve. We want them to be ethical, and we want them to enforce the law. If you can't obey the law, then you can't enforce the law. Would you agree with me on that? It's very difficult to do both. So our officers are very concerned about proactive patrol. You know what that is? Anybody have an idea what proactive patrol is? Proactive patrol is trying to deter crime from occurring. If we can be visible in certain areas that we have identified as high crime areas, if we stay in those areas, then hopefully we can deter the crime from occurring. If a crime does occur, the officer responds, and there's two things that he's looking for. If he's going to make an arrest, he has to have evidence. If he has no evidence, what's something else that could help him? If there's people that saw the crime. Yes, sir. Witnesses are a great answer. They are key to any investigation. What witnesses do for you is witnesses speed up our process for an arrest. Evidence, as you know, when we collect evidence from the scene of a crime, it's not like CSI. You know, everything's not solved in 1 hour minus commercials on a TV. It takes a lot of time for us to collect that evidence, to analyze that evidence, and to piece that evidence to a particular suspect. The evidence that we collect all throughout this entire county and most of this southern region go to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. They analyze every piece of evidence for this entire region. So because of that, they are just overburdened at times, and it takes months for us to get the information back that we need to piece that crime together. So when we have a witness there that can fill out an affidavit, attest to what they saw, and then we can take that information and use that witness later on down the road for court purposes, it speeds the case up. Now, we handle a lot of crimes that occur that a lot of you would be familiar with. Burglaries, robberies. We have to handle traffic crashes inside the city as well. We have to handle any person's crime. A lot of the new crimes that are occurring are now occurring on the web, on the internet. Can anybody give me one indication of what crimes we would investigate on the web? Yeah, in the back there. Cyberbullying is a very big problem nowadays. And as you know, the social websites that are out there and the availability now that people have to get onto any of these websites and degrade someone, make negative comments towards someone. A lot of times these are young kids that are doing this, or teenagers talking about another kid. What do you think that does to a young man or woman when they read about these negative comments or they hear something that someone has read? Anybody have a clue how that would make you feel? Cyberbullying has become a nationwide problem. And because of some of the things that have occurred on these websites, unfortunately, some young people have died. Has anybody heard of that? Have any of y'all heard about some of those issues? Okay, so we have to think about what we say to anyone on a daily basis. We have to be concerned about what we write on any website, any social network, and make sure that we're not affecting the life of another person. Now, bullying in itself is a crime. If we can prove that because of someone's actions, they caused harm to another, a lot of these cases are being prosecuted now. One of the cases where an adult made some comments about a teenager, that teenager died as a result of that. That lady was taken to court. She was tried for that. So this is something that we have to stay on top of. A lot of our officers are throughout Manatee County are trained on website investigations. They stay in touch with all the local media outlets. They stay in touch with the websites and what's being said. They have different ways of going about. Do you think that law enforcement would be able to get into someone's Facebook account if they had to? You think that could happen? Absolutely. If we needed to investigate a crime, we can get the documentation, the subpoenas needed to get onto anyone's Facebook account or Twitter account, whatever the case would be. So this has become a major problem. We've had to redirect some of our investigators into a new field, where before a detective would go to the scene of a crime and investigate what's happening at that particular scene. Now he has to go on the internet and investigate through the web. So it's become a very big problem. Officers are held to a higher standard. Just like everyone in this room, we're sworn. We're sworn to uphold the laws and protect and serve. And because of that, we have to handle ourselves differently than others. When an officer doesn't conduct himself in an orderly manner, he's fired. If an officer does not conduct himself in a way that we feel is that we want a police officer to have, then they're fired and they're asked to go work somewhere else. Why do you think that is? Anybody have a reason why an officer should be held to a higher standard? Do you believe that? You think we should? Why is that? Absolutely. Have you ever heard of an officer being fired because of his actions?
Yes.
Yes. And that is a very degrading thing for the other officers to have to deal with, because you have a person that's taken the same oath of office as you. You work with them on a daily basis. They've committed some type of an act. Officers have been arrested before. They have been fired, and it puts a bad light on everyone else. Would you agree? If you have something going on with in the scouting world, and someone does something and you see it on the news, it's embarrassing, but it also shines a bad light on you, because you don't want an officer to be beyond reproach. You want them to do what they have taken the oath of office to do, and that's to protect, not break the law, serve and protect. So that's something that we take very, very seriously. We have an internal affairs unit. Internal affairs handles any complaint that comes in that's dealing with an officer. If someone complains on an officer, then we take the appropriate action to see if that's a valid complaint, if an investigation needs to be continued, and then we will take the appropriate actions. All right, any questions? I know we have a load of questions, so any questions at this time that you would like to ask? The question would be, how do you feel about people in general? Do you enjoy being a police officer? How do you feel about minority groups? And do you think that you are misunderstood by the general public? I think that law enforcement officers have done a great job, especially in the last 20 years, with some of the outreach programs we're involved in, to getting to know the public, being more in tune with what the public's needs are, and letting them see what we're all about, and bonding together. So the public understands, just like today, what the law entails, what we have to do in our job, why we do some of the things that we do in our job, and we continue to bond with the public. We need the community to assist us in some of the crime fighting programs that we have. So we need for them to help us. So we can't be apart from one another. We have to be together. So therefore, we do everything we can to make them feel comfortable, and to let them know that they're a very, very important part of our role as law enforcement officers, and we can't do this job without them. The community, when you're in a neighborhood, you know who belongs in your neighborhood, and you know who does not belong in your neighborhood. So when you see someone that's in there that doesn't belong, and you feel they may be up to some type of criminal activity, so we need for the community to call us then. And that's what we've really worked on here in the past 20 years. You know, with Neighborhood Crime Watch and some of the other programs that you'll see, it's making the public aware of what we need for them to do, and then what we're going to do when we get there. So I think that's been a huge, it's been a lot of progress that we've made, and it's been a benefit to both the community and law enforcement. Minority groups are very important to law enforcement. There is no difference between any particular group. We work with I work personally with several minority groups in the city of Palmetto, on the African American side, and also on the Hispanic, the Latin groups. And what we're trying to do with them is build trust. When a particular group doesn't trust law enforcement, it hurts us. It hurts both of us, because then information is not being shared, and when information is not shared, crimes are not solved. So minority groups are very important to the success of law enforcement, and therefore we try to do everything we can to make sure that trust is not broken, and build relationships. One of the biggest problems that we have when we're trying to solve a crime, and there are people that witnessed the crime that won't speak to us about what they saw. They won't give us the information. And I want you to think of it like this. If you had a bicycle and someone stole your bicycle, and you didn't know who did it, but your friend sitting right next to you knew who stole the bike, but he won't tell us. And if he tells us who stole your bike, we can go get your bike back, and we can take care of that situation. But because he doesn't tell us, we can't get your bike back. Now, how would that make you feel? That's what we deal with on a regular basis. People not wanting to get involved and therefore not telling us key information that would help us solve a crime, and very serious crimes. All right, next question would be, how can we help you do a better job? Just what we just discussed, community involvement, being involved with the more eyes, the better. The more that we have people involved in the community calling us about things that they see, reporting crimes in progress, and helping us to get there quicker and to respond. And then also on the prosecution side, if you see something, fill out the affidavits that we need and be a witness and help prosecute. That would be key. What is being done in your community to help police officers and people know each other better? What else can be done? I pretty much hit on that. Our officers are involved in public events every week. We go to the community. I have 7 trained officers that do nothing but go into the community. They're called community resource officers. They go in there and they take care of different needs in the community. Any events that go on, we work them together. Any barbecues, anything whatsoever that community wants to be involved in, we do it together. So on a weekly basis, they're out there building relationships within the community. Our police trained well enough to handle emergency situations like riots, mobs, terrorist acts, and so on. We train continuously. Every year, we're mandated. Yeah, we train very well. We're trained better than most. That's our primary function. If you have a situation that occurs, no matter what that is, we're going to be the first responder. We're going to be the one that are asked to go in. If there's something going on, a major disaster in a school, we have to go in. If hurricane evacuations, we're going to go in. We're the ones responsible for that. And because of that, we are mandated to train specifically on certain requirements every single year. Florida Department of Law Enforcement mandates that we do that. So you're going to be so well trained if you get into law enforcement that you won't even think about what you're doing when it comes time to react, because you have trained so much. And if you train properly, your training takes over during a critical situation. Have you ever heard that? If you train kind of so-so, just kind of go through the motions, don't really concentrate, you just do what you got to do, and when that situation hits, that's how you're going to react. If you train hard and you train the way you would react during that situation, then that takes over. Training takes over. And it's well documented that, for instance, in a shooting, officers that didn't train properly resulted back to that poor training in a high stress situation. Do police officers think their work is hampered by the courts and by laws that protect defendants? Are you satisfied with the criminal justice system? What can be done to improve the situation? Law enforcement understands exactly what we have to do to prosecute a person for a crime. They have rights. It's our job not to violate their rights. Their rights have not changed through the sands of time. I mean, we know exactly what we have to do. The biggest thing that has occurred in law enforcement was the Miranda warnings. Anybody know what Miranda is? Anybody tell me what your Miranda warning would be? You ever seen on TV, you have the right to remain silent? That's called Miranda. We have to give that suspect that information before we can ask him any questions, and if he decides he doesn't want to answer the questions, then he has that right. So the system is there to protect all of us. The system is there to make sure that the guilty people are prosecuted, and that if you're innocent of a crime that you have been suspected of and you didn't commit the crime, that you're not prosecuted. Everything, in my opinion, is exactly the way it needs to be, and it works out perfect. You have the law enforcement side, you have the attorneys. They're going to make sure that law enforcement is doing everything that they're supposed to do, and then you have the judge that's going to take all that information into account during trial. And you wouldn't want it any other way. We wouldn't want it any other way. It's checks and balances to make sure that the right person is put into jail if that's needed. Should police be allowed to unionize and have the right to strike, even though they are essential to public welfare and order? I don't think that they are. We have a lot of unions. PBA is a big one. There's a lot of unions throughout the country. Law enforcement will usually not strike because that would really put everyone else in danger. So they try to go about it in different ways. They try to go about it in a orderly fashion where you have the union and the chief or the mayor or the sheriff talking about the different demands that the officers want for contracts. But you probably will never see a law enforcement agency strike. And if they did, that would probably result in most of them being fired and new officers being brought on, because you just cannot have public safety issues. You can't have the public at risk because that group of officers want more pay or more benefits. It just doesn't work that way. Is organized crime a major problem in our area? How does it affect the police? Organized crime really is not a major factor in our area. We concentrate on a lot of different crimes that occur, but organized crime would not be a major problem here. In your bigger states, yes. There are still big organizations that illegal outfits that like to do a lot of mafia type crimes and drug crimes. We don't have that major problem here. What we do have that we deal with on a regular basis is some of the gangs. Now, gangs could be considered a part of organized crime depending on what they're doing. But we have taken a lot of those gangs already and charged them federally under a RICO Act, a racketeering charge, and you take that group and you charge them as a unit, and all the crimes they have committed during a certain time period are all put on. They're arrested for all those particular crimes at once, and then because of that, their sentences are higher. If you disagree or agree, let me know. But the reason why we carry a firearm is only because to protect us and protect the citizens. There is no other reason. Bad guys are going to carry guns. Bad guys are going to get guns. Now, they don't go to the gun show and they don't go to the gun shops. They get their guns through illegal ways. They get them through stealing them, or someone else has stolen a gun and they buy it from them. But unfortunately, that's just a part of what we have to deal with. And if we were not armed properly, then we would be ineffective in protecting you and ourselves. So because that's such a prevalent part of our society, we're going to have to be able to defend. And yes, I do believe that officers should wear name tags. I've worn one for 28 years. All of my officers wear them. I don't think you'll see an officer in Manatee County that doesn't wear a name tag. It's either going to be one that clips on, like the one I have on today, or it's going to be embroidered in their shirt, but they're going to have their name identified on their uniform. Should police officers use no-knock entry and wiretapping even though these actions could interfere with people's privacy rights? No. No, we have a very high standard. There's a lot of information and evidence that we must obtain before we can even get a warrant to wiretap someone's phone. The law is very clear on how we will serve a search warrant. A search, you will knock and announce. After the judge has signed off on that warrant, he feels that you have enough evidence to even enter that home. The statute requires us to follow these particular guidelines, and one of them is knock and announce. And if you don't knock and announce, and they find that out during court, then you're going to lose that case. So wiretapping, once again, the judge is going to look at the evidence, and they're going to take everything that you have at face value. You're going to swear and affirm that the information that you're providing him is true and accurate. He'll make a decision if you have enough. And I tell you, it has to be a very serious crime or long-term investigation before a judge is ever going to sign off on a wiretap. It's not a common practice. How should complaints against police officers be handled by civilian review boards or internal police units? Both. A lot of agencies do either or. In the city of Palmetto, once a complaint comes in, an internal investigation is conducted. If that officer is found to be guilty, there is a number of different steps that are taken, and he's either, depending on the offense that was committed, he's either going to be suspended, he may get a letter, suspended, or fired. Now, he does have the right to appeal. His first appeal would be to me. If I uphold the decision, then he has one more step, and that would be through a civilian panel. And that's made up of community leaders throughout the community. They have agreed to sit on this panel, and then they make a decision. It's almost like it's like a court, a civilian court. I have to go in front of them and present my case to the panel, just like I would in a court of law. The officer gets the same right, and then they make the determination if they're going to uphold that firing or if they're going to change it. So we do not have a SWAT team. Because we're so small, we are in the process of training a few officers that are trained just for SWAT situations. We use the Manatee County Sheriff's Office. They will come out anytime we need them on a SWAT call, and that's who we call if that's something that we're going to have to need. Is there anyone here that would be interested in a career in law enforcement? Okay, good. The first thing that you got to do, obviously, you need to graduate high school. That's very important. Then you want to go to college. So we want you to go to college. If your field is criminal justice, we want you to study that field. We want you to become the best that you can be. And then once you get out of college, you'll have to attend the law enforcement academy. And there's a lot of programs out there nowadays that when you're going to college, you can also be going through the academy at the same time. So there's a lot of benefit to going to college, and you can get a lot of the academy time out of the way. That's just going to make you a better officer. Because a lot of what we do is documentation. We do a lot of writing. That's going to prepare you for organizational skills, prepare you for writing the best report. If you don't write a good report, what happens? I'll tell you what happens. You don't write a good report, then when the state attorney sees that and all the elements of the crime is not in there, you're going to lose the case. So education is key. There are things available to you right now. Manatee County Sheriff's Office has an outstanding Explorers program. Gives you the opportunity to get out there, ride with deputies, be involved in the community. They do fingerprinting. They do a lot of different community events, and you get to kind of see what a law enforcement officer does on a daily basis. There's several jobs that you can do throughout your career, depending on what you like. You'll always start off as a road officer. When you get some experience and you get a little seniority, then there are different fields that you can try to transfer into. One would be the detective division. The detective division is going to be a good step. It's going to teach you how to be a better investigator. You're going to take cases that come from the road officer, burglaries, robberies, homicides, serious cases, and then you're going to be given the task of working daily on these cases to try to either develop a suspect or arrest the suspect that's already been identified. There are K-9 officers. K-9 is a job that a lot of guys like to get into. They love animals, they love dogs, so they still work on the road, but their task is to assist the other officers with drug searches, person tracks, building searches, and also to chase suspects. So the dog is a lot faster than you and I, and they are one of the greatest tools that law enforcement has. We also have crime prevention deputies and officers. Their primary role is to go out and to build that bond we were talking about in the community, to teach people how to be more responsible homeowners and how not to become a victim. And what I mean by that, personal safety. There's certain things that you need to learn about personal safety that may help you from becoming a victim. There are things that you can learn from residential security on how to better secure your home so someone cannot break into it. So that's a very important role of law enforcement when it comes to the community building that we talked about earlier. And there's corrections. If you don't want to be on the road, if you would rather work in the jail, a corrections officer starts off, he makes the same amount of money as a road deputy, but he's responsible for the day-to-day operations at the Manatee County Jail. A lot of people like to start there to see if they like law enforcement, and then they work a few years in correction and they transfer out onto the road. Several of my friends have done that, and it's really a great way to start your career because you get to see both ends of the spectrum. You get to see the correction side, what goes on with these inmates when they're incarcerated, and then you get to see what it took to get them there. Forensic evidence really has been a major deal breaker for a lot of our cases, especially in the last 10 years. DNA. DNA is big. Anybody ever heard DNA? A lot of times you'll hear, you swab someone's inside of their mouth and take that information and take that evidence compared to the database, and you may get a suspect or you may get them linked to other crimes. There's touch DNA. Touch DNA has really been huge for us in the last few years, and that's where we can take a swab of a doorknob or the inside of a vehicle and steering wheel or dashboard or armrest, and we can use that now to compare. If you have a suspect, then it makes the job a lot easier because you already have their DNA and you take the DNA that you found at the crime scene and then they compare it. If you don't have a suspect, then you're hoping that the DNA database that you have is going, that suspect's going to be in that database and you're going to be able to find them that way. So you have no idea who committed a crime, you've got DNA. If they're in that database and you get a match, then that's a probable cause you need to continue that investigation and make an arrest. Now, fingerprints are still big. Fingerprints are a key to a lot of the burglary cases that we make every day. Our officer lifts the fingerprints at the scene of the crime. We get them from the vehicle burglaries. We have a lot of vehicle burglaries. A lot of people get arrested for that. Those fingerprints that we have obtained from that vehicle is what led us to a lot of our suspects. Fingerprints are done 100 times a day between all the agencies in Manatee County. The Manatee County Sheriff's Office can actually analyze those fingerprints now. We send it to them. We don't have to send it to Florida Department of Law Enforcement. We send it to them. They have the database. It goes through a system, and they can tell us who those fingerprints belong to. So those are the two key forensic evidence techniques that we use on a daily basis. The biggest drug problem that we have today in Manatee County and basically nationwide are prescription pills. Prescription pills have really taken over and devastated a lot of families. It's very important that you understand that if you know someone that tells you that they took some pills from their mother or father's medication, that's a crime. So if you see someone with pills, or you know someone's taking pills, what should you do? What are you supposed to do? Go ahead. Yes, sir.
Call the police, or you have to go to a rehab or rehabilitation center.
Well, the first thing we want to do, I mean, that's great. Has anybody ever seen someone at school with any illegal drugs? Anyone? Have you ever heard of it? We have a Campus Crime Stoppers number that you can call if you know of anything going on in your school. So if you know someone has some illegal drugs and you want to call this number because you really don't know what to do, or you're afraid to go to the teacher, or you're afraid to go to a particular administrator, you can call the Campus Crime Stopper. You should have it up in your school. You should see brochures throughout the school. Have you not? Has anyone ever seen that before? Okay. That is a way that a lot of our juvenile crimes are solved, is through Campus Crime Stoppers. But pills are something that, unfortunately, more and more teenagers are testing. And most of them are getting the pills from a pill bottle that their mother or father had because of an injury. They're highly addictive, and they really will ruin your life. So I would just ask you, if you know someone that is around you or around the school and they have pills, that you report that to a teacher or an adult that can handle the problem. And that would go for any drugs whatsoever. But pills are something that have really, like I said, devastated a lot of young people's lives here in the last 2 years. All right, thank you all so much for your time. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you, Chief, for providing us with that information and taking care of that part of the merit badge that requires law enforcement to be the topic that you learned today. And you learned it straight from the top person in the county for Palmetto, who has experience with the Florida Highway Patrol, with the Manatee County Sheriff's Office, and now with the chief at the Palmetto, city of Palmetto. So we're going to switch gears a little bit, and we're going to talk about the law as required under the merit badge. And all of you have got your book. Now, I saw a few scout books here. Who has a scout book here? I see a scout book over there. You got one. Anybody else have a scout book? I want you to look up. Tell me what page the scout law is on. And while you're doing that, what we're going to talk about is sources of laws. And where do laws come from? And I want a lot of you to think about it and then raise your hand if you can tell me. Has anybody ever looked up the law? Who's looked up the law? Anybody curious about the law? Anybody look it up? You have? Where'd you look it up? Where'd you look it up? In a textbook, you looked up the Constitution. Was that the United States Constitution? Okay. And that's one type of law, and that's the basis of our law. And the United States Constitution or the Florida Constitution. What's another type of law? Yes, sir.
Hammurabi's Code, that's another type of law.
Okay, that's a law. That's law. And we're going to have Mr. Ron Whitt, who's going to talk to you about that in just a few minutes. Yes, sir, in the back? The what? Okay. All right. That's another type of law. Anybody else? Now, if you wanted to, has anybody looked up the law on the internet? Has anybody been curious about looking something up that might be against the law? Nobody? Okay. Well, you can look up and find the law in different ways. Now, I brought with me one source of the law, and this just happens to be a paperback bound law of criminal law. not only the substantive law on what crimes are, which we're going to use in our trial a little later, but also procedural law with respect to criminal law. Now, books is a good source of law. Has anybody looked up law in books? You have? Okay. And how about the internet, where you can go online now and look up laws? You can look up state laws. You can look up federal laws. You can look up laws that pertain to a county or laws that pertain to states. And you can look up all types of different types of laws. Now, in Florida, as in any state, you have laws that pertain to your state. And those are state statutes. And this includes the statutes on criminal law out of the statute of Florida has on all laws that control everything. And why are laws in place? Can anybody tell me? Tell me why.
People just don't commit crimes.
So they understand what is right and wrong, correct? Okay. Now, let me go back to those gentlemen that had the Scout Law in their book. Who looked it up? What page is it on? 24, okay. And so what did those laws tell you that Colin helped us with earlier by all of us reciting? What do those laws in the Scout Law tell you? Morals? They'll tell you how to act, don't they? Okay. And how to conduct yourself. Now, the Scout Law is somewhat unique because it not only tells us what is against the law, but it tells us what? How to conduct our lives, correct? So I'm here to tell you it's an important part of the merit badge of law to understand how important the Scout Law is for the rest of your life. If you obey the Scout Law, you will be successful and have a fulfilled life. If you violate the Scout Law, then your life may not turn out as well as you'd like it to, or it will turn out differently. But the same goes true of other laws that are set forth by the state or the county or the community, and where they want to also control or provide some conduct that might be against the law. But laws are also there for other reasons. They're there to protect citizens, aren't they? They're to protect you, aren't they? And laws are just not criminal laws. We heard law enforcement, but we're going to hear from Mr. Whitt in just a few minutes and throughout the morning on why there's other types of laws, civil laws, that are just as important as criminal laws as there are other laws. And so at this time, what I want to do is turn the podium over to Ron Whitt. And Mr. Whitt is an attorney in town. He's practiced for 30 years in civil law, and he knows a lot about some of the history of the law, and he's going to cover some of those at this time. So, Mr. Whitt?
I just want to commend you to consider a possible career in law, because you really deal with real life situations, real people, real circumstances in life that have problems. And one of the privileges you have as a lawyer is to help people solve those problems. That's really what law is about. Like Judge Smith said, I mean, what the law is to tell people how to act, what to do, and what's right, what's wrong. And sometimes that's very clear. We know certain things are pretty clear. Don't steal or don't lie. But sometimes there's a lot of laws out there that tell people what to do, but it's not so clear. And that's what lawyers help people do, is to be able to understand what these laws are, why they're there, and what we are to do. Now, part of what I'm going to talk about for just a few minutes this morning now is the history of the law. And I know that you hear the word history and it kind of sounds kind of boring, but it's not boring, because there's been a lot of events throughout history over thousands of years that deal with the law that are very interesting, because it deals with some real life situations that really affected history and why we have the law that we have today. And so I wanted to kind of start with a couple of the earlier laws in history, and one of them was mentioned by this young man here a few minutes ago, and that's the Code of Hammurabi. And the Code of Hammurabi, it sounds kind of interesting just because of the name there. But in ancient Babylon, and we're talking now about 1700 BC, so we're talking almost a couple thousand years ago, in ancient Babylon, there was a ruler there, and his name was Hammurabi. And Hammurabi ruled that area in what is now Iraq. And we probably have all heard the country of Iraq because there's been a lot of war going over there that the United States has been involved with for the last years. But ancient Babylon was located there in what is now Iraq. And this ruler, Hammurabi, was one of the very first rulers to be able to take laws, the way that the people should conduct their lives and act, and put it down and grouped them into categories of types of laws. How to run businesses, how to act in the public. And he took these laws, and since it was a very long time ago, it wasn't like you could kind of publish it in a book like Judge Smith had kind of held up here a minute ago. So what this ruler did was to take giant stones, big black stones, and carved these laws into these stones. And these stones were maybe 8 feet high. And these stones would have been placed in all very strategic areas of the city and the country, so that people, when they passed by, they would see these laws and could read them, and they would know what to do and what not to do. And if they broke these laws, they knew that the king would punish them by breaching these laws. So the interesting thing I think about this is, even though this was back in like 1700 BC, before Christ, that's a long time ago, the laws were organized enough and specific enough that it assumes that there were these kind of laws in place even before that, maybe hundreds, maybe even 1,000 years before that. So law has been around a very, very long time, and that's what civilization is about. You know, back in the caveman days, for example, law, there wasn't any law. It was the law of whoever was the strongest, whoever was the most powerful. That's the person who got to get his way. And so the weak people that were not as strong would end up being wronged in many times. So these laws have been around a while, but it shows you that civilization, people coming together to say we want to live together and to be able to be civil towards each other, it required laws. Hammurabi was one of the first ones to be able to get this organized in a way to make it effective for people. Now, let me kind of fast forward a couple of thousand years or so from Hammurabi's time to England. And of course, most of our ancestors came from England and other parts of Europe over to America. And so back in England, maybe in the 1200 AD, so we're talking maybe 800-900 years ago. It's still a long time ago. But back in England, there was a king, and the King John at that time was the monarch. He was the ruler of England. And as you know, kings got their way. Kings could do pretty much anything they wanted to. If the king says something, you must do it. And if the king says don't do something, you didn't do it. And he was absolute in what he could do. So in England at that time, the history of law tended to change a little bit because the king had to have men throughout the country that were known as barons. And barons were men that would be granted big tracts of land, and they would run that land. They would get people to farm that land and to run businesses on that land, and they were able to help the king collect taxes and monies to be able to run the country. These barons became more and more powerful over time because the king needed them. Well, the barons had a lot of privileges there. They had a lot of wealth and a lot of money that they were making, and they did not want the king to be able to just arbitrarily take those privileges away from them. So these barons kind of got together, and they started to force the king to do some things that the king maybe didn't want to do, because the king needed them and they needed the king. So they kind of got together and they came up with what has become to be known as the Magna Carta. Okay, and that's just a Latin term that means Great Charter. And it's one of the first documents really in our more modern Western civilization that became very influential in our American government. Because our Constitution that was adopted in the 1700s in the United States really was very greatly influenced by the Magna Carta. And the barons, when they got together, they really forced the king and the king to issue this Magna Carta. Now, the thing I wanted to kind of mention about this is that this 25-member committee of barons that got together to force the king to make this charter that would kind of restrict the king's ability to take away their privileges just arbitrarily, it allowed the barons to, in certain circumstances, to overrule the king if he breached this charter. Okay? And so there was 25 members on this committee. And it's kind of the forerunner, if you will, of what we now know as Congress. We have a Congress up in Washington, and they're made up of all kind of representatives from around our country. And these representatives that we get to vote on, they get to go up there and they make the laws and they enforce laws throughout the country. And they are kind of a checks and balances to the president. And so you can see how the Magna Carta was kind of a forerunner to our own Constitution. Now, one of the things I just want to mention about the Magna Carta that is really important, and that is within the Magna Carta there were a lot of provisions, and many of these provisions have been either repealed or modified. They're no longer maybe in effect, but there's 3 provisions that have stood the test of time and have remained in effect in the Magna Carta and have been carried out really in our Constitution and really throughout the world. And that was, there was freedom of the English church in the Magna Carta, and we see that now in our Constitution in our First Amendment. Our First Amendment guarantees the freedom of religion, okay? The freedom to worship as we please, and for the government not to establish a religion. The other one is what was called the Ancient Liberties of the City of London. And this provision, London has been around for many, many, many years, even way before the Magna Carta. And so the Magna Carta guaranteed that the City of London could continue to enact its own rules and laws, even though the Magna Carta kind of governed the whole country. And we see this now in the United States too, because we have not only the United States and the federal government, but we also have the states. And the states get to make its own rules. And so our United States Constitution has a specific provision. It's the 10th Amendment that basically says that whatever is not expressly given to the Congress in the United States, the states get to retain its own ability to make its own laws. And the state of Florida has its own laws and its own legislature and so forth. And then finally, the most important part of the Magna Carta is a provision that guarantees due process. And I don't know if you've ever heard the term due process, but it is a very important feature of the law. And what it means is that that is a fundamental guarantee that all legal proceedings against a person, they have to have a fair hearing, a fair trial, if you will, and that they have to be given notice of what they're charged with. If they're charged with a crime, they have to know what they're charged with, and they have to be given an opportunity to be heard. Okay? They have to be able to present their own defense, so that someone can't just railroad somebody through without any notice of a hearing. And so that due process clause that was in the Magna Carta, really all the way back into 1200 AD, is in our own Constitution in the United States, and it's what's known as the 14th Amendment. And the 14th Amendment has been a great source of many, many cases in the United States, of very interesting cases that have been used to deal with the issues in slavery and all kind of discrimination, different kind of cases that are very, very interesting in history. So that's just kind of two areas, the Code of Hammurabi, the Magna Carta, that have been a great influence on the law, and particularly those of us in the United States. Now, I wanted to take a couple of minutes now and switch a little bit of gears and give you a couple of trials in history, famous trials that have really had a big effect in terms of the way we look at the law. And one of them is the trial of Socrates. Anybody heard of Socrates? So who was Socrates?
He was a great philosopher, got students about freedom. And his best students were Plato and someone else.
Right, yeah. And so you've been reading your book, and that's good. Socrates was a very interesting man. We don't know a lot about him because a lot about him is written about by other people, like Plato, like you mentioned. But he was a philosopher in ancient Greece and ancient Athens. And so he lived probably 400 BC. 400 years before Christ. He was in ancient Athens, and these Greek philosophers would spend a lot of time with young people, just like yourself, maybe even your age, and they would be teachers, and they would be people that would seek after truth, finding out truth by using their reason to determine what is right and what is wrong. And so he believed in that goodness in people was really determined by knowledge, okay? The more you know, the more opportunity you have to be good. And if you're bad, it's because you're ignorant of these things and you don't know about them. So he was a great teacher. Well, in this search for truth, Socrates tended to get himself in trouble. And sometimes he was very critical of the government in Greece and Athens, and he was critical of its leaders. And this got him in trouble because eventually he was arrested. And he was arrested and put on trial. He was charged with crimes. Well, these crimes might sound kind of odd to us today because the crimes that he was charged with were corruption of the young. Okay, so he would be charged with corrupting people just like yourself, corrupting you and getting you to stray from where you ought to be in the way that the establishment said that you should be. Well, when he was charged with his crime, he was 70 years of age. So he was an old man, a very old man of that time. And so he was charged and he was put on trial, and he had a jury of 500 men to judge whether he should be convicted of this crime. Well, he had no lawyer to defend him or assist him in his trial. So these are all kind of things back in this day. You didn't have the kind of formal trial system like we have now, where you've got the judge and the juries and the lawyers to help you. But he had to present his own defense, and these 500 men that were able to judge this did not agree. Most of them didn't agree with what he had to say about free speech and free thought. And so he was convicted. And he was convicted of this crime. And the thing about it is that the punishment for this crime of corrupting the youth was death. And so he was going to be put to death. And one of the things that he had to do was to drink poison. And this poison was called hemlock. And if you drink it, you're going to die. Well, he abided by the decision of this jury, and he drank the hemlock. And so this hemlock, was going to kill him. And within a few hours, he was dead. But during that time before he died, he spent it talking to his friends, his students, and ultimately he died. Now, that whole example of that trial is important because this is a man that was found to be guilty of a crime at that time, but he was almost assuredly not guilty. He was innocent, but yet he was put to death wrongfully because of the society at that time wrongfully convicted him. Now, from that crime that far long ago, let me kind of fast forward now to a trial that you might have heard of called the O.J. Simpson trial. Anybody ever heard of the O.J. Simpson? So, all right, so some of you out there are football fans, and maybe you've heard about this trial, but this trial took place back in the 1990s, so, many of you may not have been even born yet. But he was a famous football player in the NFL. He was a very good running back, and I remember watching him on TV. He was very, very good. Hall of Famer. Well, many years after he was out of football and retired, in 1994, his ex-wife, Nicole Simpson, and her boyfriend, named Ron Goldman, were killed. They were stabbed to death, brutally murdered. And over time, more and more of the finger started kind of pointing to O.J. Simpson, that he might have been the one that had committed this murder. He was about to be arrested, and he took off in his white Ford Bronco on the interstate out in California. And there was a long police chase. It was on the news. It was broadcast all over the world. For many hours, he was going down the interstate. Someone else was driving, but he was in the truck. And he was finally caught, and he was put on trial. And this trial started in about 1995. January 1995 is when all this took place. And he pled not guilty. He said, "I didn't do it." And so the state has to prove that he did it. And then in criminal trials, and we'll talk more about this later, but in criminal trials, you have to prove someone is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. The jury has to find beyond a reasonable doubt that he did it. And so this trial really centered on a lot of the evidence that was there. Now, in this case, there were two bodies. There was all kind of the weapons and so forth at the crime scene. There was blood. They even found blood in and on his truck. So there was a lot of evidence that kind of pointed to O.J. as being the one who committed this crime. Now, what's interesting about this trial is that since O.J. was so famous, he was rich, and in a way, he was very powerful. And so he was able to hire a whole team of lawyers. And these lawyers were famous in themselves. They were very powerful lawyers. And so his team of lawyers became known as the Dream Team, because you couldn't ask for better lawyers to defend you if you're going to be charged with a crime. These lawyers had already tried many, many cases, many high-profile cases. And so when this trial started, there was a judge by the name of Judge Ito, and he had to preside over this trial. The jury was sequestered. And sequestered basically just means that they are kept isolated away from the general public so that the public could not influence their decision. And so this trial went on for quite a long time. And ultimately, the trial turned on the evidence. And one of the things that I always remember is that O.J. was required to try on a glove. It was a bloody glove. And this bloody glove was a key piece of evidence. And if this glove belonged to O.J., if they could prove it, he would probably be convicted of this crime. But they had the prosecution had him try on the glove. Well, over many, many months, this glove had been sitting there. And these gloves tend to shrink and so forth. And when he put the glove on, however he put it on his fingers, the glove didn't fit. Well, his lawyers, the famous line that came out of this trial is, if it doesn't fit, you must acquit. You must acquit him of the crime if it doesn't fit. Well, this glove didn't seem to fit. Now, maybe it was because he just didn't pull it on well. Maybe it had shrunk. Maybe it wasn't his. Nobody really knows for sure. But the whole trial seemed to center on this glove that didn't fit. And so ultimately, the jury acquitted him. They found him not guilty of murder of these two people, his ex-wife and this other man. Well, this is an example of a trial that a man was found not guilty, but maybe was guilty. And we don't know for sure, but he was found not guilty. And so it's just the exact opposite. Whereas Socrates was found to be guilty and he was probably innocent, O.J. was found not guilty, but he might have been guilty. And so what you find in these trials is that there was not necessarily enough evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he was guilty. So if that's the case, then the jury's instructions are that the judge gives to the jury is that you must find someone not guilty if there's not enough evidence to do it. So O.J. was found not guilty. Now, there was later a civil trial where the family of the people that were killed brought a suit against O.J. in civil court, which is different than criminal court. And what they were doing is they were going to file a lawsuit to recover money damages from him for doing and killing them. Now, that's a different standard of proof. And all you have to prove in a civil trial to get money damages is to prove that by a preponderance of the evidence. And all that means is that you have to have enough evidence to reasonably establish that he did it, that he killed them. And so they brought that trial and they won in the civil case, and they were able to get a damage judgment against O.J. Simpson for $8.5 million. And they've been trying to collect that money ever since. O.J. is actually in prison now because of some other crimes that he committed after this. But those are two trials in history, one very ancient and one pretty modern. And you might have maybe are aware of the Casey Anthony trial. Anybody heard of the Casey Anthony trial? Did anybody see any of that on TV? Yeah, well, that was a pretty interesting trial there. And Casey Anthony, it was very similar to this trial in that she was found not guilty also because there wasn't enough evidence to convict her that she had killed her own little child. And in that case, you know, there was a lot of evidence to suggest that she might have done it, but there just wasn't enough concrete evidence to show the jury that she did it beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, that's what I'm going to kind of stop on at this point. Does anybody have any question about any of the laws or any of the trials maybe that we talked about? Any questions at this point? Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you have been selected and sworn as the jury to try the case of the state of Florida. I am accused.
This case is not a complicated case, and we should only be here for it one day. The state has charged the defendant, I am accused, with the crime of burglary of a dwelling. It is my responsibility to prove each element of the crime beyond a reasonable doubt, and that is what I will do.
Good morning, members of the jury. I also want to thank you for your service on this jury. The burden of proof is on the state to prove beyond reasonable doubt that my client, I am accused, committed the crime.
What is your name? Where do you live?
1234 Crime Street. Crime Scene Street.
What happened on January 1st, 2012 at your house?
When I returned home at about 8:30 p.m. from going to dinner, I noticed that the door was slightly open, as if someone had gone in but did not close the door.
How far were you away from the person in the house?
25 feet.
Were all the lights out and were all the lights on in the house?
No, I just got home.
If the lights were not on, how could you see the person in your kitchen?
There's a flashlight on the refrigerator side.
Both the state and the defendant have now rested their case. The attorney will now The attorneys now will present their final arguments. Please remember what the attorney says is not evidence on your instruction on the law. However, do listen closely to their arguments. They are intended to aid you in understanding the case.
The defendant committed the crime of burglary. In a few moments, I'll get a chance to talk with you again. Thank you for your attention.
Mike said that he just had a flat tire on his bike and could not go. Mike asked my client, I am accused, to deliver the silverware to Mike's grandmother for him. My client did not look into the bag and had just left on his bicycle when the police stopped him.
A reasonable doubt as to the guilt of the defendant may arise from the evidence, conflict in the evidence, or the lack of evidence. If you have a reasonable doubt, you should find the defendant not guilty. If you have no reasonable doubt, you should find the defendant guilty.
All right, members of the jury, in just a few moments, you will begin your deliberations. The first thing you need to do is elect a foreperson, who in this case has been elected already. If you do not agree to the verdict from the members of the jury after you take a vote, then you need to talk about what the case is and what the facts were. But the first thing you need to do is take a vote. The foreperson should take a vote from everybody on what they believe the verdict will be. The choices are guilty or not guilty. Once you have agreed to a verdict, the foreperson will sign the verdict form and hand that verdict form to one of the bailiffs. Then you will be brought back to the courtroom for the verdict to be read. The verdict is simple. It reads as follows. We, the jury, find as follows as to the defendant in this case. A, the defendant is guilty of burglary of a dwelling. Or B, the defendant is not guilty. Bailiff, at this time, will you hand the verdict form to the foreman? And all the bailiffs come around here. Will you escort the jury back to the corner of the room so that they can deliberate? It looks like the jury's coming back. Okay, defendant, so it looks like the jury's coming back. Okay, have you reached a verdict in this case?
Yes, we have.
All right, could you please hand the verdict form to one of the bailiffs?
We, the jury, find as follows as to the defendant in this case. The defendant is guilty of burglary of a dwelling done and said this 4 day of February 16th, 2012 at Bradenton, Manatee County, Florida. Okay.
Signed by.
Signed for four-person signature signed by Timothy Foote.
You just went through the basics of a trial, a criminal trial, with most of the things that would happen in terms of testimony, of swearing in witnesses, of having the lawyers give openings and closing arguments. So you went through this. So do any of you have any interest in any career in law? Who has an interest in it? Anybody? Colin? You do? Okay. You all did very well. You've been through something that most of the public doesn't have seen or even knows about, and it's a very important part of the justice system, and it's a part of society that you have been through this, so that you could, if you wanted to go into law, use this as a basis for going forward.
That was pretty good there. You guys did a great job with that, and what you just experienced there was the basic structure and format of a trial, and specifically a criminal trial. And as we talked about, on a criminal trial, the burden of proof is very tough, okay? And we talked about that. You have to find someone guilty beyond a reasonable doubt to convict them. And that beyond a reasonable doubt is a pretty high standard of proof, as you've seen, but they found them guilty. What I want to talk about for a couple minutes here is a civil trial as opposed to the criminal trial. And a civil trial is when you are filing some kind of a suit against another person. Two people have a difference of opinion on something. Somebody has wronged somebody. Maybe you had an agreement, a contract, and the person didn't fulfill their contract. Or maybe you were in a store and you fell and somebody left a banana peel on the floor or something wet and they slipped and they fell and they hurt themselves. Those kind of suits that are brought are between two or more people to address a wrong, and usually what you're trying to get there are money damages. A piece of paper that says that you're entitled to collect money from the person that was wrong to compensate you for that injury or that wrong. Okay, so this is a civil trial, and the law for this has developed over many years, and a lot of it comes out of what we've already talked about some this morning, and in the video that we saw on the deriving out of the Roman law, and then ultimately from the English law that we call the common law. And the common law is just many cases that have been tried over many years, and by trying these cases and coming to a ruling on these cases, the legal system is able to develop a system of decisions that they would base their decision in the future on future cases. So these are civil cases. And as we've mentioned already, the burden of proof in a civil case is not as high as in a criminal case. When a person is on trial for a crime, you want the standard to be very high. In a civil case, the burden of proof is what they call a preponderance of the evidence. So if the plaintiff, who's the person bringing the case, is able to present enough evidence to sway the jury that the person has wronged them, then they can get a judgment for the plaintiff. If the defendant is able to present evidence to say maybe more evidence shows that it didn't happen, then the jury will bring back a verdict of $0. Okay? So this is the difference in a civil trial versus a criminal trial. Now, the one thing I wanted to kind of bring out too, the two main types of cases that you'll see in a civil trial are breaches of contracts, and then the other type are what's called a tort. Okay? And a tort is usually something where a person has negligently done something that has hurt somebody else in some way or wronged them, or they may have intentionally done it. Just like we talked about earlier in the O.J. Simpson case. Even though he was found not guilty in the criminal case, that doesn't mean that the family could not bring a suit against O.J. for money damages if they could bear the burden of proof, a preponderance of the evidence. They don't have to prove quite as much in the civil case as they did in the criminal case. So the state brought the criminal case, the family was able to bring the civil case against O.J. And they actually won the case. As we talked about, they got a judgment for $8.5 million against O.J. because of that. Now, in a tort again might be negligence. Again, what you see on this is sometimes if somebody has been hurt in some way, maybe a car was defective and it blew up or caught on fire. Well, the manufacturer of that car can be held liable, and people that have been hurt can bring a suit against the automobile manufacturer for that. And there have been many cases like this over the years for cars that have been defective. Sometimes in these civil cases, if there's enough people have been hurt by, say, a bad car, if, let's say, the car was catching on fire, and many cars have been catching on fire of that same make and model, it's possible to bring what's known as a class action suit. And that means that, an attorney might bring a case, one case, on behalf of many defendants, maybe hundreds of plaintiffs, hundreds of people that have been hurt. That one attorney will bring that case on behalf of all those people so that the court can adjudicate these things in one case instead of bringing hundreds of trials. They can do it all in one trial. And then if there's a judgment entered against that automobile manufacturer, for example, then all of the people that that lawyer is representing will share in the award of money that's been sought there in that one case. Now, that's the basic distinction between a civil trial and a criminal trial. One thing I wanted to kind of address now are some of the laws that have been enacted in our country over the years to help protect people from being hurt in these kinds of cases in the first place. And there are many, many laws there, particularly federal laws, that Congress has enacted to help protect us as consumers, okay? And then also it will protect people that sell products as well. One of I'm just going to mention 2 or 3 of these laws that have been passed. One of them is called this Consumer Product Safety Act. And this is an act that was enacted in 1972, okay? Now, what we are trying to protect against with these kind of laws are just like we're talking about, say, with an unsafe car. There have been examples where cars would catch on fire for no reason, or maybe the accelerator would stick and cause someone to crash. There have been even cases where cars have been known to be top heavy and they'll turn over. Well, the Consumer Product Safety Act was a law passed by Congress to help a commission to be able to examine and inspect these various products to make sure that they are safe from unreasonable risk of injury or death. Okay, and so the various things that are covered by this act might be things like toys. There's all kind of various toys and electronic equipment. There are electrical devices, electronic devices. There are things that involve fire and chemicals. All these are inherently dangerous items, and if you just let anybody manufacture something like this without any kind of standards, then a lot of people can get hurt. So what the law tries to do in this act is to prevent these injuries from occurring in the first place. And then if they do occur, there are measures to be able to fine or punish the manufacturers of these products if they're done in a negligent manner. And people like you and me, if we're hurt, we have a remedy that we can bring to court and have a trial to get money damages if you've been hurt or you've lost things out of this injury. Okay, so that's one of the acts that's been enacted called the Consumer Product Safety Act. Another one that was passed way back in 1914 is called the Fair Trade Commission. Now this is kind of similar to the product law, but it basically deals with businesses not being able to do things to run over other businesses. Okay, you have to be in business to make a profit, but you have to do it in a fair way. You can't do it in a way to trounce on a smaller business. And so the Fair Trade Commission enacts laws that will keep businesses honest and fair, okay? But it's not designed to make business where they can't run it at a profit. It is designed to make it done fairly, okay? And the last one I'll mention is a relatively new law that's come into play really more in your lifetime. And it was really like 1996 is when it was enacted, but it wasn't until 2003 that it was fully enforced. And it's what we call the HIPAA law. And this was what they call the Health Insurance Portability Accountability Act. HIPAA is what they call it. And what this is designed to do, if someone works at a business and that business provides health insurance for the employee, and that employee gets terminated or they have to move to a different state or something like that, this law is designed to allow that worker to maintain their insurance even though they no longer work at that company for a period of time. Okay? And so it protects that worker and their family. And the biggest provision of this law is what is called the Privacy Act information. There is health-related information that you have. Each of us has information at your doctor's office, at a hospital that you might have been at. And all this information talks about your condition, your physical condition, your mental condition. All these things are in records. And it might be on a computer, it might be on paper. And all this information years ago would get out. And all kind of people would see this information. And if someone saw information about you that might be damaging to you, if, for example, maybe an employer wouldn't hire you if they knew you had a physical problem or an emotional problem. And so now this law protects that information and keeps it private. So a hospital cannot give out this information to anybody unless you consent to it. Okay, so all this law right here came into play really in 2003. And it's a very important law, and so hospitals and doctors are very conscious of this now, and they're very strict in how they have to maintain your medical information. Okay, so those are just some laws that have been enacted just over this century that have been designed to protect the consumer out there. All right, now, I wanted to take just a couple of minutes now and talk to you about what does it take to become a lawyer. If you're ever interested in going into law, becoming an attorney, I think it's a very rewarding career that you would enjoy very much. You work with all kind of people in all kind of situations, and it's a very rewarding career. If you ever have an interest in becoming an attorney, you can certainly probably visit with an attorney in town. They would be probably happy to sit down and show you how things work. But if you're interested, what you want to do first of all is obviously graduate high school. And you want to graduate high school so that you can go on to college. And when you go to college, you want to get a degree. And the best thing I can recommend to you is get a degree in something that is a broad kind of a degree that will help you in life. Not only help you in law, because you might go to law school and find out that you hate it. And if you hate it, you want to have a degree in something that you're going to be interested in doing otherwise. But you could major in something like business, get a business degree or something like that, where you will get a good understanding of how the economy and the world works, which will help you in becoming an attorney. To get into law school, there's two main things that you have to know. One is you've got to have a good grade point average. You need to have a good GPA. That's one of the big factors that a law school will look at to admit you into law school from college. The other thing is you have to take what is known as the LSAT. It's the Law School Aptitude Test. And it's a standardized test, and some of you will probably be taking the SAT in high school before you go to college. The LSAT is similar, but it's a test that shows whether or not you have some capability towards law and to be able to handle law school. Between your grades and the LSAT and your character, the law school will make a decision whether or not you should get into that particular law school. Once you get through an accredited law school, an ABA accredited law school, that's the American Bar Association, accredits law schools. Once you graduate from that law school, then you have to take an exam in the state that you want to practice. So if you're going to practice in the state of Florida, you have to take the Florida bar exam. And it's a pretty grueling exam that lasts over a couple of days. And so that bar exam tests your technical competence. Okay? You have your education background, then you have your technical competence measured by this exam. And then the Florida bar will look into your character and your background. They'll make sure that you haven't been a criminal or something like that, and they want to have people of good character that are admitted to the Florida bar. So between your education, your examination, in the technical end, in the bar exam, and then also in your background check to make sure that you are qualified, then you can be admitted to the Florida bar. And a judge, just like Judge Smith, usually would administer the oath to swear you into the bar, and then you are what's known as an officer of the court. I am an officer of the court. Judge Smith is an officer of the court, and we are held to a very high standard of care. We're held to that standard to be able to represent the public, to make sure that the public is able to have a fair system of justice. And so we are under a lot of rules. We have to maintain clients' monies in a segregated account called a trust account. And we have to do a lot of things to account to the bar and to the public every year. And we have to have continuing education. Every 3 years, we have to attend certain numbers of seminars and classes and education to stay on top of what's happening in the law so that we can be competent and proficient in representing clients in different matters. Okay, thank you. I'll turn it back over to Judge Smith.
Now, could I, after Mr. Witt's explanation of what an attorney is, anybody who wants to be an attorney? Anybody out there? Okay. See 2 or 3 hands, and I'd encourage you to do so if you want. Just do the things that Mr. Witt said. Grades are so important. Reading's important. Learning English is important. And just studying well and learning how to study, because getting through law school is about studying, and it's about reading and writing. Very important. So Mr. Witt covered everything that has to be completed to be a lawyer. Because when you become a judge, you have to have practiced law for a number of years. So all the things Mr. Witt described to you of being in good standing as an attorney, being qualified as an attorney, having good character as an attorney, has to be done before you become a judge. And in order to become a judge, in Florida, you have to have been 10 years in practice of law before becoming a circuit judge, and 5 years in the practice of law before becoming a county judge. If you practice law for 10 years and you're in good standing, you're able to become a judge at that time. If you are 5 years practicing law, you become a county judge. I'm a circuit judge, so I had practiced many years before I became a judge. And you become a judge, a state judge or a county judge, by either being appointed by the governor of the state of Florida or by being elected. In my case, I ran for the office after another judge retired. I ran in a campaign and ran for judge in a nonpartisan race. And so as long as you have been an attorney for a period of time and are in good standing, you can run for a judge as long as you have been practicing, as long as you need to be under the statute, either county judge or circuit. Now, some of the things that I would suggest to do if you want to become a judge, because several of you raised your hand about being an attorney, and possibly if becoming an attorney, you might have an interest in being a judge later. I would suggest that you learn a lot about the law in every area, not concentrate in one area, such as criminal law or such as just civil law, but to learn a variety of different types of laws, so that when you become on the bench, that you have more experience and are more diversified in a number of different fields that you'll be involved in as a judge. In this circuit, the circuit judges cover criminal felony trials and felony cases, civil cases of $15,000 and up. All juvenile cases are heard by the circuit judge. So anybody under 18 that gets in trouble goes before a circuit judge in juvenile court. There's also family court, which deals with adoptions and also divorces and also domestic violence. And then the last division in the circuit judge is the probate, that deals with when individuals die and there are estates to be administered. And so those are the things that the judges do, but becoming a judge is very satisfying. It is community service, just like all of you in Scouts do community service hours for every rank that you earn. Being a judge is a community service, and you're serving your community. So I basically am working for you. and I will keep this job as long as I am able. I have to run every 6 years, and all the judges, the state and the county judges, run every 6 years for campaigns, and so at that time they will decide whether to be reelected or not. So after giving you a little bit about what judges do, anybody want to be a judge? One person. Okay, yes, you do? Two couple of people? Colin, you don't want, I know you want, maybe go into law. You want to be a lawyer or a judge, or maybe? Okay, maybe. Okay. Now, all of you scouts, you have completed the requirements of the Law Merit Badge. There was a lot of material in here. We pushed a lot of it to you in 4 hours. You participated in a trial, which unlike many people don't ever get to do that. And so you have completed the Law Merit Badge. So please get your forms to me so that they can be signed off. And I want to thank all of you for your attention. I want to thank Charles Clapsaddle from METV for being here today to film this for you, to educate others on this process and on this merit badge. So congratulations to all of you.